There it goes.
Just move this over. And now I would
Okay, so
just
maybe
click.
there's no options. Maybe you see either the screen or me. I would go for the screen if I had a vote. Okay, so what is a property tax exemption? Oh, please help me. Okay, a property tax exemption in Texas is locally assessed. I bet you never thought about it, but the state of Texas does not have a property tax. If you look at your tax bills, you will not see a tax from the state of Texas on it anywhere. That's because the taxes are locally assessed. Now, the state constitution authorizes the assessments, but they don't collect any taxes. So the property taxes that we all pay are used for local governments, for schools, for police and firefighters, libraries, parks, and all of those other services that we all need. Okay. Uh-oh. Should have gone back. Okay, so Texas has a variety of partial or total exemptions. That's what we're going to talk about. From appraised property values. So the exemption is exempting a certain amount of the value of the property from the payment of the property taxes. So that is a partial exemption. And as we all know, because we've all worked with 100% disabled vets, there are also total or absolute exemptions where a property owner does not have to pay any property taxes at all. And it seems to me, I've been hearing more and more people talk about having gotten their exemptions or gotten their disability. So it looks like they're not being too difficult in issuing those 100% exemptions, which is a good thing. So the taxing units are required by the state to offer some of the exemptions. Some of them are mandatory, but there are also optional ones that can be decided by either the tax. Hey, Tony.
I'm virtual.
I don't really see you.
I'm not right here.
Man, he must have been upstairs. That's the only thing I can think of. So there are also some of the other tax exemptions that are optional. So either the taxing authority or the taxpayers have to vote to agree to assess some of the optional ones. So how do you obtain a property tax exemption? What do you have to do to get one? Texas law requires that the property owner apply for an exemption in most circumstances. There are some exceptions, and the general deadline for filing an exemption is on May 1. If you miss the deadline, you can still file for the exemption, but you will have to pay a penalty. So be sure to get those exemption requests in. There has been a major change, which I will show you in just a second. Some exemptions require that the property owner file the application only one time, like a homestead exemption for example, as long as they occupy that particular piece of property as their homestead. Once they apply for it, they do not have to reapply every single year. But there are some that do require to be applied for each year. So who determines the eligibility for an exemption? Guess who? That is our friend, Mr. Michael Amesquita in the Bear Appraisal District. The chief appraiser of the appraisal district is the person who determines whether an exemption can be approved or not. The chief appraiser has several options. It's not just a yes or a no. It could be a yes. It could be a no, but maybe yes, if you'll give me more information. It could be modify the exemption application, you're asking for too much, your only disability is only 30%, you can't get 50%. So if you modify the application, then maybe we will approve it. Or you can just say, no, absolutely not. But of course, the person applying for the exemption can always appeal. I want to know why. The taxing units can appeal the granting of an exemption to a property owner. So let's say Mr. Anasquita approves a tax exemption and the school district says, oh, no, 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 that homeowner is not supposed to get that exemption, then the taxing authorities can also protest that. So exemption applications need to be decided exemption issue. Most cases will depend on one or more of the three following issues, whether it's approved or not, usually depends on the owner's eligibility, the property's qualifications, and the property's use. And we will talk about that in a few minutes. So when do approved exemptions become effective? This one is going to be a major change. One of them is the date for determining an owner's qualifications for most exemption is January 1 of a year. So what's happening on that property on January 1 of that tax year is what usually results in the rest of the year exemptions being either approved or not approved. Homeowners who reach the age of 65 during a year, so this is one of those exceptions. You don't have to be 65 on January 1 to be able to get the exemption for that year. When you turn 65, be it March 15th, be it August 29, whenever, that is when the exemption you become eligible for it, but you do have to apply for the over 65 exemption. It's supposed to come to you automatically, but don't count on it. The surviving spouse who is at least 55 of a property owner who was 65 can be eligible for the over 65 exemption. So let's say my husband was 65 and I was 55 and he was eligible for the 65 exemption and he passed away, then because I'm 55 and it was my homestead at the time too, I am eligible for that exemption as well. Disabled veterans or the surviving spouses with homes donated by charitable organizations, they don't have to wait until January 1 of the following year. They can get it immediately.
Marissa and Cortez asked if you remarried, does it go away?
Yes. Yes, it does. A surviving spouse of a U.S. Armed Service member killed in action is eligible for the exemption. Whoa. Wow. Okay. There's one more down there at the bottom. Well, let me just tell you what it is. Firefighters, policemen, those type of people who are killed in the line of duty, their surviving spouses are also eligible for the tax exemptions as well. Okay, there it is. Surviving spouses of first responders. Okay, so this is the new thing. In the 87th legislature, the second call session, it was approved that you no longer have to own a property on January 1 to be eligible for the homestead exemption. So if you buy a property anytime during the year, you are eligible for the homestead exemption the day you take title to the property instead of having to wait until the next year. So if you buy a property on June the 30th, you become eligible for the homestead exemption on June the 30th, which is huge because it used to be you had to own it on January 1 of a property to be eligible for the homestead exemption for that year. And there was only one day. Basically, you had to close in the year before or on January 1 and get it all recorded. But now that has changed. So we can thank the Texas legislature for something.
But you still have to apply it.
You still have to apply. It's not automatic. And this became effective January 1 of 2022. So it's effective this year. It's not retroactive. So that is a good thing. Okay, so now let's talk about the different types of exemptions. Some of the most, and there are zillions of them, but we're going to talk just about some of the ones that are most recently requested or questions are asked about. And they are residence homestead, and there's your tax code. You can look up whatever I'm going to tell you. Veterans exemptions, surviving spouse of first responders, and agricultural use and open space land special valuations. So technically, you hear the term ags exemption all the time. It's not an exemption. It is a form of appraising a property. It's not an exemption, but we'll still call it that today because that's what we're used to hearing it called, an ag exemption. We'll talk about that. So, residence homestead. The general residence homestead. Texas law used to require that school districts offer a $25,000 exemption on residence homesteads. Well, here's some more good news that we can thank the 87th legislature for. In the third call session, they changed that amount from $25,000 to $40,000, effective May 7th of 2022. So effective on May 7th, the amount of the homestead exemption will be $40,000 instead of $25,000. Other taxing authorities can also, they have the option to provide additional exemptions if they choose to, or if the taxpayers vote that in, but it cannot be less than $3,000. That'll be at least $3,000. So the $40,000 is mandatory. Any other ones you get from any other taxing authorities is optional. And there are no specific qualifications to be eligible for a homestead exemption other than you've got to live in the house. You don't have to run around the block or jump on one leg or do anything crazy to apply for it. You just have to be eligible for it. You have to live there. And when you apply for it, your driver's license address has got to match the address of the home that you are applying for the exemption for. So when you're talking to your clients, you'll want to recommend to them one of the first things they do is to go get their driver's license changed. Because if they still have their driver's license from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and they're trying to apply for an exemption at 123 Main Street in San Antonio, it will not be approved. So also general homestead exemptions. Normally, the exemption applies only to the part of the residence that is used for residence, not for business. So if you have a beauty salon in the back half of your house, the homestead exemption doesn't apply to the back half of your house because that is business use. It only applies to the residential use of the property. An urban homestead can be up to 10 acres with improvements, but if it's a bunch of lots that equal 10 acres, they all have to be adjacent to each other. So you can't have one lot on the north side, one on the south side, one on the east, one on the west. They all have to be adjacent lots in an urban homestead. A rural homestead, the homestead is limited to 200 acres for a family and 100 acres for a single adult, including improvements. So if it's an urban homestead, you've got a whole lot of land that you can use. So now, for age 65 or older or disabled, Texas law requires that school districts offer an extra $10,000 on residence homestead exemption to people who are 65 or older. Any of the taxing unit can also provide an additional exemption, but it cannot be less than $3,000. And just FYI, you can't get the $10,000 for over 65 and an additional amount for disabled from the same taxing authority in the same year. So let's say the school district provides a $10,000 extra exemption for over 65, and then the road district wants to give them, be nice, and offer another $3,000. The property owner can't take both of them at the same time. They can take one or the other, and then the next year they can switch it up, just depends on what is most beneficial for them. As we talked about, if the over 65 person or property owner passes away, their spouse who is at least age 55 is eligible for the exemption. And a disabled person has to meet the definition of disability for the purpose of payment disability insurance under the Federal Old Age Survivors and Disability Insurance Act. So there's not a standard amount of what everybody would get the same amount. And they've got to be eligible under those definitions of disabled. So all of this, we're still under residence homestead. So in the 86th legislature, which was in 2019, the eligible disabled person who was 65 at that time, let me see, would be permitted to elect. Before that, they could get both. But in the 86th legislature, as I already mentioned, was when it was changed from both to one or the other. So we can thank John Ray for that in the House. I don't even know if he's still in the House. So the tax code places a ceiling on school taxes for residence homesteads owned by people over 65. And the ceiling continues for a surviving spouse who is 55 or over. Now, the homeowner can transfer the percent of tax paid based on their ceiling if they purchase another home and use it as their principal residence. So basically, whatever amount they got on the house they're selling, they can use that same amount on another house, which is good because I would venture to say that most people are downsizing and will be paying less taxes. So they're actually saving more. City, county, junior school district, they can offer a tax limitation too, and they can decide on their own or a petition of the residents. Lots about residence homestead. So manufactured homes and co-op housing can also be eligible for homestead exemptions. A manufactured home, there will be some hoops that will need to be gone through because it's very important. The statement of ownership has to be done correctly. You cannot go down to the courthouse and look at the deed records and find the ownership of a manufactured home. You've got to go to a different department of Housing and Community Affairs and get the information from them. So in order to be eligible for a homestead exemption on a manufactured home, got to have that information available. And a co-op, if one person applies for a homestead exemption for a co-op is basically, let's just call it like an apartment building where everybody owns shares in that apartment building and everybody has their own ownership. So that would be, let's say there are 50 properties in there, that would be 50 different applications for homestead. And so the chief appraiser is going to have to do them one by one by one by one, but it still can be done. Okay, uninhabitable or unstable. This is for our friends in, well, whoever might lose a property or have a lot of damage as a result of natural disasters. If a property is uninhabitable or unstable, based upon a disaster declared by the governor. It's got to be declared an official disaster declared by the government. And exemption can be, and they have a homestead exemption on the property, the exemption can remain on the property even though they can't live there while they are rebuilding that property. They've got to start rebuilding within 2 years of the disaster, and they can only have it for 5 years, can't have it for any more than that, because I guess they figured that in that time, you should have been able to rebuild the house. So uninhabitable or unstable. And there's a different set of rules for something that might be partially, and that's coming up, partially damaged. So a temporary exemption for qualified property damaged by disaster. So this has you jumping through a whole lot more hoops. The damage has got to be physical damage, yeah, for it to qualify as a property and as a damaged property, and it's got to be at least 15% damaged, or they're not considered damaged at all. So again, it must be declared a disaster by the government. The owner has to render a statement demonstrating that the property had taxable situs. What that means is that the property, if it was 123 Main Street, that it was actually located on 123 Main Street, that they can actually prove where this damaged property is. Oh, there's Yolanda. And so because there are percentages of damage, it's level 1, level 2, level 3, or level 4. And so those levels are based on level 1 is 15% damage to less than 30. Level 2 is 30% damage less than 60. Level 3, 60 to 90, level 4 is 100% damaged. And so that is how the amount of exemption is determined by the chief appraiser. Level 1, 2, 3, or 4. They'll take the assessed value, multiply it by 30 or 60 or 100 to determine how much the exemption would be. And so we have that. I give you this because I know we have folks that buy property down in Corpus Christi or down in South Padre Island or in Galveston that, well, maybe not often, but sometimes do have damage. What does that do to their property taxes and their exemptions? So as I mentioned, it has to be at least 15% damaged. So let's talk about veteran exemptions. Partial exemption. Of course, we know that the veterans exemptions are based on their percentage of disability, and they can also get exemptions on donated homes. So if a home is donated to them, they can get some tax relief as a result. If it's a service-connected disability also is what determines the percentage of the exemption. So if it's 60% service disability, then it's 60% tax exemption. Total exemption, 100% service-connected disability. And as we talked about in the very beginning, that is when you have a veteran who pays 0 taxes. And I found that lenders, it used to be that lenders still wanted to escrow a little bit of money because depending on that part of the year that it closed, and there might still be some due from the seller, but they're not setting up the escrow accounts on that anymore, which would cause the disabled vet to have to put money into an account for the first year that's not going to be used. So they finally figured that out. So surviving spouse who is married to a disabled veteran also qualifies for this exemption, but they cannot remarry. As long as they are unmarried, they can continue to benefit from the exemption. The minute they remarry, the exemption goes away.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Well, maybe you're gonna answer here.
Okay.
I'll wait.
So if the surviving spouse is eligible for the exemption, which they would be if they live there, were married to them and not remarried, there's surviving spouse is entitled to the same dollar amount of the former exemption. So however much the dollars were on the other one, it was percentage. On veterans, it's the dollar amount. This surviving spouse gets the benefit of the same dollar amount if they go to buy a new home. But the key is they cannot remarry. That is the key. One of the changes that was made in the 87th legislature was and it's on the next slide, but I'll just tell you what those 2 little asterisks mean. They changed the wording from killed in action to killed or fatally wounded in the line of duty, because someone could be traveling from one base to another and die in an auto accident, and that's not in action, but it was in the line of duty. So the legislature changed that. So that's what we just talked about. The eligibility for the exemption, 100%, totally disabled veteran has been awarded. Oh, another thing that they changed is the wording in section 11.131. It doesn't say anymore that they have to have received the disability. It's rather that they have been awarded the disability. So that seems like a minor change, but it could be a big one. And that became effective January 1 of 2022 as well. And here we go, killed in the line of duty instead of killed in action. So Tony, what was your question?
My question is, and I didn't see it there, so.
Yeah, that's why
Is it
I wanted to
broken
ask you.
down- Is it broken down, is it broken down also in percentages that you get an exemption? X amount of percent, and then X amount of percent up to 100%,
On,
your tax exemptions if you're a veteran?
yeah. Mhm. And it's based on the degree of disability.
So do you know what the?
Well, it depends if the
like,
Veterans
1 to
Administration,
30, 1 to 40%, or 1 to.
well, it's 1-to-1. It's 1-to-1. If you're 30% disabled, you get 30%
No,
exemption.
but I mean, is there a range? I guess, is it like from 0 to 30%, or 31% to 71? Do they do it in brackets?
No,
Okay,
it's exactly what it is. If it's, I've never heard of one that wasn't a round number,
okay.
but if it's 39%, it would be 39%.
Yeah, see, because when Mel gets it, he's at 80%. He's trying to get 100% right now. But it went like from 40%, it wasn't like, he had 40%, then after his stroke, it went to like 80%. And so now,
Okay. The reason I asked is I thought Amber Speed said that there was brackets for it. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Okay, so here is a chart of the residence homestead exemptions. So it's got the exemptions, the tax code, the taxing unit, Is it total or partial? Is it mandatory or local in the amount? So that one on the very top that says $25,000, the chart hasn't been redone yet, but as of May 7th, 2022, it will be $40,000. So this, all that I've been talking about is right here. Okay, and then it continues because here are our disabled vets with homes donated by charitable organizations, 100% surviving spouse of armed services and surviving spouse of first responders. And so I can, if you guys want this chart, I can definitely get it to you. So let's talk about ag use and open space. This is such a pain for title companies, but okay, we deal with the ugly and we deal with the pretty too. So in 1966, the Texas voters approved the first constitutional amendment, which authorized agricultural properties to be appraised instead of at its value or market value, appraised at its capacity to produce. So that's why the appraisals are different. And they are called 1D and 1D1. And we'll talk about the differences in a second. So in 1978, the voters approved a second constitutional amendment, adding section 1D1 to the Texas Constitution, allowing for open space. So the first one is agricultural producing agricultural products. The second is open space. And there have been like a gazillion amendments since then that add wildlife management and a whole bunch of other things to the 1D1. And in 1995, the Constitution was changed again so that 1D1 could be used also to manage wildlife. So now, eligibility requirements. What do you have to do to be eligible for a 1D appraisal? And this is all straight up from the Constitution and from the tax codes. A 1D, or what we call an ag exemption, is available for individuals only. A corporation cannot get a 1D agricultural appraisal. And what is it that determines a 1D agricultural appraisal? What would you have to do to get one approved? The current use of the land must currently be used and devoted to the agricultural use and must be the primary use of the individual for the bulk of the year. The individual intends to use the land for agriculture as an occupation or a business venture. So they could sell Mary Kay too, that's okay, as long as their primary business is agriculture. If you're in the city, I wouldn't do it. I would suggest no. Just asking for a friend. And as I mentioned, agriculture is the individual's primary occupation, and the individual claiming the right to have his land designated for agricultural use must apply for the designation every year he claims it. So this is one of the ones where you can't just do it once. You got to keep on applying for it every year that you want it.
Can I have a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Does the whole property need to be fenced in for that ag?
It doesn't have to be fenced. It just has to be utilized. It has to be used for agriculture. It doesn't have to
Okay,
be
so it
fenced.
doesn't have to be like fenced. So like if I did get cows.
You could
then I
definitely
can-
apply.
Can I fence in just a little bit of the property? See, that's what I thought, that if you, the whole acreage had to be fenced
No,
in. So
it
I
doesn't.
could just do a little fenced in area and put 2,000.
When my mom rented at San Saba, the place she rented had to have exemption, but it was, it was, they had, part of their vineyard, like some of the wine.
Oh,
the
yeah.
grapes were
Mhm.
growing on their land, and so she liked to put us for insurance. So she
So now the 1D1 appraisal, which is the open space appraisal, the land, this is different. It's not just for individuals, it's not just for agriculture. This one, they have to prove that the land has been principally devoted to agricultural to a degree of intensity, meaning what's going on in the area, how much agriculture is going on in the area for 5 of the 7 previous years. Land that has been devoted principally to the use or production of timber or forest products. Ecological qualified open space land includes appurtenances, private roads, reservoirs, all that stuff. All of that is included in it. And land currently devoted principally to wildlife management qualifies as open space.
Is there a minimum size, acre size?
No, not a minimum size. Reapplication on this one, you don't have to reapply every year, but it's required when the owner changes the use or sells the property.
There's no minimum requirement for ag. I thought it was like 10 acres.
I think if it's in the city, it's like 10 or in a urban area as opposed to a rural area. One thing that is very adamant is that a property is ineligible for an exemption if it is owned by a non-resident alien, or under 1D1, a corporation can own the property, but it's ineligible if a foreign government, a non-resident alien, or any combination of the two has a majority interest in it. So basically, it's for citizens only. Okay, don't like me anymore. Oh, there we go. So in the 86th legislature, the use were changed again. Interestingly, the law became effective January 1 of 2021, but it doesn't apply until January 1 of 2027. Why? I don't know. So for public or private colleges and universities, they must also have used it principally for 5 of the preceding 7 years. So they were kind of stringent about authorizing these kinds of exemptions and appraisals. So rollback taxes, these have changed some. And actually, I was shocked because they're changed for the better. So the law imposes rollback tax on 1D land. Remember, that's the one individual agricultural use. A lien attaches to the land itself to secure payment of the rollback taxes. So the minute the property is no longer eligible for the agricultural exemption, the lien attaches to the rollback. And interestingly, 1D still has interest that applies to the rollback taxes, whereas the 1D1, it has been taken off. So recently, the rollback period was changed from 5 years to 3 years. So once the property is sold or changed use, they can only go back 3 years, the market value for 3 years instead of 5 years, which is huge. That's a lot of money. So the rollback tax is calculated by determining the difference between the amount of tax that was paid and the amount of tax that was due. So the chief appraiser would make 2 annotations. The market value is this, and the agricultural value is this. So the market value, say, is $500,000. the agricultural value is $25,000. So the property owner is paying the taxes on the $25,000. So when it's time to roll back the taxes, they take the difference between the 500,000, the 25,000, and tax $475,000. And it used to be for 5 years. Now it's just for 3. So that helps a little.
And the seller is responsible for
Whoever changes the property use. But what's going to happen is the tax offices don't care who pays it. In their mind, whoever is entitled when the use is changed is who pays for the rollback. So let's say that I'm a farmer and I sell my property to you.
the developer.
And you, developer Tony, change the use from a farm to a subdivision, then I am not the one responsible for the payment of taxes. That would be you, because you changed the use. It's not me. I just went through this with my family, okay?
No, I mean, I mean, for future reference, you know, I tell my client, want to sell it and the developer wants to buy it. well,
Ex-
actually, we're selling it. as
Yeah,
it is.
selling it,
This is the price.
exactly,
Change it.
exactly,
Well, they have to change it, developer will have to change it because they're gonna have to go to the county
exactly.
and say, I'm gonna put.
And see, they're gonna
100
look,
houses on there.
and then the county is gonna look at when was that deed filed? When was the deed filed? And so from that day forward, after especially, oh, you got plans to build a subdivision, do you? Okay, so rollback taxes, here we go. And this is interesting, the property owner has 1 full business day, ooh, how generous, a whole day, after triggering the rollback to pay the taxes. And if they don't, then they start accumulating interest at 1% per month,
So the minute he changes it, he has a day to pay the taxes on it.
1 day.
So even if he himself wants to change that exemption or whatnot, then he has to go back and pay.
He's gonna have to, exactly, and then he's gonna have to apply for it himself if he had farm too. So they will leave it the same. They will leave it the same if one farmer sells it to another. Then they'll look at the date the deed was filed, go take a look, and there's just new cows out there. Instead of the other cows, these are new cows out here. So it's still being used for that agricultural use, and that exemption will remain for that year. But then the new farmer has to apply for it for himself the next year. So,
What I think what she's talking about is, you don't wanna, if you're a ranch owner or farm owner, you don't wanna rezone a commercial, because then you're gonna get,
whammied.
Yeah.
you're gonna get screwed. You're better off selling it like this commercial, say, developer.
I was
You're
thinking
probably
like
not
if they lost their exemption for whatever reason, now they gotta go back 3 years and pay possibly.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so you're better off just leaving the cows on there until you sell it. And then take it off, and then let the developer worry about what he's gonna do with it.
Is there someone that goes out and checks like?
Yeah,
Hey, we need to have a certain amount of cows. I
Yeah.
don't see any cows.
yeah, exactly. And that's exactly what happened to my family. We had some property in Hayes County that we were selling, and I love y'all, okay? Keep that in mind. The realtor told my sister-in-law, oh my gosh, you better, because it was early in the year, you gotta go and apply for the exemption again for this year. And she did, and what did that do? That triggered the appraisal district. Oh, why is she doing that? And they went out there, saw the cows were gone, so we had to pay the taxes.
But you can go back and put cows back on there.
It was too late. It was too late because the buyer had already gone to the appraisal district and said, okay, I'm gonna do this, 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 and this, but we had already applied for the exemption, and so they just denied the exemption because they knew that for the rest of the year, the property
You
was
had
being
sold
sold.
it. You had sold it, right?
It was sold.
So why did you have to do it if you sold it?
It was not closed. It had not closed yet. It was still when the usage changed, when my sister-in-law filed that renewal for the exemption, it triggered the appraisal district to go, after they had heard from
She
Mr.
didn't file
Byer.
it before? She hadn't filed it before?
She had filed it before, yes, but this was a piece of incorrect information. I'll put it that way, because the appraisal district said, well, we weren't gonna go out there and look. But then when you applied for it, we had to go look.
But you said you have to apply for it every year, right?
Not on, this was 1D1. This was 1D1, so we didn't
You just
have to.
Apply for it once, right?
Yeah, in 1D1, you apply for it one time unless you change it.
So she had already applied.
She had
for it.
applied for it,
So why did she have to go back over there and reapply again?
and B, she didn't have to,
But the agent told her to
Yes.
reapply.
and so she did.
Had she have left the cows there
And
the
not,
day before closing?
not said a word,
They
or
just
even the
forgot.
day of closing. Record the deed, get your check.
There was
Move the
no-
cows. Mhm,
Your cows are there.
mhm. Yeah, yep, so we
I
paid the
have
taxes.
Pictures of the cow patties. They're there, I just moved them to another lot. They were there, obviously they were there.
Yeah, so selling the property, selling
Must have
the,
been an EXP agent.
it was one of the, well, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna leave it right there. Okay. So it used to be 7% that was charged on the rollback taxes on 1D1, and now they do not charge interest. I said tax, I meant interest. They do not charge interest. And you got a little bit more time to pay the rollback taxes too on 1D1. So the rollback tax, the bill is mailed out and becomes delinquent if not paid by the first February 1 date, that at least 20 days after the tax bill is mailed.
Question,
Yes.
so how come your sister didn't ask you?
Maybe she called me and I didn't,
It was too late?
and it was too late.
She's like, "No."
I'm like, you did what? So what?
I don't like my brother either.
Yeah, it's kind of like one of those whole, oh, I bought a house. Oh, yeah, I forgot you were a realtor. That just makes me want to slap people. For real. So what happens at closing? We provide the buyer a homestead exemption application so they can apply for their homestead exemption. And a copy, as I mentioned, the driver's license address has to match the address of the property that they're applying for. The seller, we will inform the sellers, it's their responsibility to advise the appraisal district of the sale of the property. They should be watching the deeds that are filed, and then there should be a cross-reference when the buyer applies. And it will, once the buyer applies, but sometimes things go over a buyer's head, and then the homestead exemption stays on the property in the seller's name for 3 years. And that's a problem. That is a problem, because we get ready to close on it again, then there's rollback taxes due, because you can roll back taxes too on property that has gotten the benefit of exemptions and it shouldn't have.
So when a person buys it from, let's say I buy your property and then they're using the rental, that's not my homestead's over here.
Mhm.
And I just leave the homestead on there, and then I go to sell it,
That's
that's when the rollback happens.
That's when the rollback happens. Yep. We've had that situation where, and a married couple cannot have two homesteads. They can only have one. So he had a house, she had a house, they bought a house. 3 years later, they come to refinance their house, because they're gonna sell his house, and he still has a homestead exemption on his house, even though he's been living in this house and renting this one for
But you
3
didn't
years.
file a homestead on the new house, right?
He did not file a homestead on the new house, but he left the homestead on his old house. So when it was rental property for 3 years.
So when happened, when he
She
goes,
did.
Does he have to pay that?
Yeah, they had to pay the rollbacks. She applied for the homestead exemption, but they were married at this time. So you can only have one homestead when you're married,
when you're not married,
and they were married. When you're not
So-
married, you can still only have one homestead. One homestead, no matter your marital status. One homestead. Okay. Tony, you got me off rhythm.
that's because I deal with complicated people, so I'm asking complicated
Oh,
questions.
okay, all right.
So I have to not have to advise people. It's interesting. Go seek the advice of Wayne.
Great, awesome. Yeah. 100% rated from the date. The title acquired. I don't even know what time it is. Okay, so we let the sellers know, they've got to let the appraisal districts know when they sell the when they are no longer having the property as a homestead. And if they don't, then we are going to hold back 1.5 times the amount of taxes until we can find out how much the taxes rollbacks are going to be, so that we can pay them, so that we can make sure that we have sufficient, because we are on the hook for ensuring to the buyer and the buyer's lender, if there is one, that there are no back taxes due, and that no back taxes are going to come at them later. So we're going to hold that money from the seller, which is exactly what we did. And of course, they weren't happy, but at least the taxes got paid. And then once we ask our tax company to calculate an estimate for us, and then we'll collect 1.5 times for that. In the meantime, we're asking the county to assess the rollback. When they give us the exact dollar amount, we'll pay it and refund the difference. If we held too much money, we will refund the difference. Refund the difference. And if it's not enough, we're going to be calling the seller. Oh, Mr. Seller, we need more money. 3 years, maximum rollbacks. Rollbacks, if they're assessed prior to closing, that's great. We'll collect them at closing. After closing, it'll be the responsibility of the parties to figure out who's paying for it. So the lenders ask us for a T30 endorsement to the lender's title policies, which costs the borrower $20. And this basically ensures to the lender that nobody's going to come after them looking for any kind of back taxes because of rollbacks, and that taxes of the current year or the previous year, depending on the time of year, are paid in full. We cannot issue that endorsement if we know there are rollbacks and they're not paid. Questions? Tony? None?
I was asking Jeff. just-
Oh, it's just for a friend.
People that get a house inherited, and because the owner passed away, they're on the hook also for not changing the status,
Exactly,
right?
exactly.
That could go on for years.
It could, and it has. And especially when you've got a situation where there was no will.
Yeah.
So you have 12 heirs and 2 of them are dead, and their kids are their heirs and one of them is dead, and all of those people, all of them have an ownership interest in the property and have a percentage of the taxes that they owe. And so they can come to any kind of agreement between them that they want to. It's just as long as those are paid. But the best thing to do is go down there ASAP. Sorry, my grandma passed away. Here is the death certificate. So we need to remove that over 65 exemption. Of course, that's going to kick the taxes up, but it's not going to be a whole bunch of rollbacks with taxes and interest when they do finally get the estate settled.
It could be like 10 years of.
Well, they usually don't go back on more than 3,
Oh,
more than 3, but that could still be a whole bunch of money. That could be
no, just.
a Dominion,
I see it. It's like-
Dominion.
Sorry about it.
So just in case you forgot, it's been an hour since I asked you, if you would please like us on Facebook, we would appreciate it very much. Okay, so Facebook land. I am going to need to jot down, oh, hi Les, I didn't know you were there. Jot down all of your names because I'm going to send you a link to pay $10 if you want CE credit. If you don't want CE credit, you can just let me know right now or pop it in the chat. Don't need CE credit and I won't send you the forms.
Well, I take the CE credit now.
Okay, so let me see, there's one person in, got a chat.
You got a job now.
Okay, so Brianna, realtexrr@gmail.com. So Brianna and Erica, I will send you both a completion, the TREC completion form that you put in your license number and you can DocuSign it and send it back. And then a separate link to pay the $10 that'll go into PayPal and you'll be good. And Marissa, thanks for sitting through it. You didn't even need to. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you. Where can we find your information? Maybe like a phone number for yourself?
Why don't I just put it in the chat right now?
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
You just come.
No, I just tell me. I tell everybody, we can wait till Monday. I think it helps that, 3 days, right, to get the earnest money in.
Yeah.
Yeah, for holidays, and Saturdays and Sundays.
When I get the email, it's around us because we're not so worried about picking up the option, making sure that the other agent gets it. Now we get
Oh, yeah,
signed
yeah, yeah.
for it, because that was, I mean, that always
Yeah, the app
concerns
too,
me.
yeah.
Yeah, we got the app, we can take a picture, but that's what scared me is we picked that up, and it is sitting on your desk for a day. Pick it up and have to get it to the other agent. We didn't want it our fault at the time.
So do either of you need credit?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Did you want that?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. I don't know where I stand.
I refer to the book.
Smart.
What did they tell you? Be the source of the source. Ready?
Right.
She's a good source, I will tell you.
I wish you guys were here. We've got,
Years.
what do we have, Kathy? Muffins and
Either
bagels
scones and bagels.
and scones and all that. Thank you.
I'm trying to wrap up so many things right now. because My arm for next week, so sorry.
You're going where?
Arm for.
Going to Vegas.
Nice.
Marissa said she wants some Cracker Jacks.
Oh,
Yes, these
I
Cracker
forgot to
Jacks.
put all that on there. Oh, there it is right there. I should have just kept scrolling.
For a top line for you guys. So if you want sheets of those, we're just gonna give you samples of what we've done. And then you can get the sheet.
Oh, yeah. Let me show you what Kathy's talking about.
Yes, we'll have different samples.
These Cracker Jacks that, can you see this? This is a pop by where we just made some, so this is an example of what we did. So the cards that are on there, it says, let me have a crack at serving all of your real estate needs. We can give you a sheet of these. I think there's like 6 on there. If you want to do Popeye, something like this, so we just kind of give you the idea and show you what we do. And then you could do that, or you could do something else. If you like to do Popeyes, we're starting to try to do one every month. And we have classes on it usually once a quarter, just something to keep you top of mind with your clients. So if you want a sheet of those, then just email me or Kathy and we can make sure, print them and bring them over here and drop them off for you.
Because each month. Sheet.
My email, gdairy.
You have to print out yourself.
No. Mm-mm. So do you want me to send you a link for the $10? Okay, all right.
Me and
At
Tony
Overpublic
asking them
Type.
questions for not as many people.
Yeah. I love it. I love oldrepublictitle.com.
These would be put out because it'll come plain on the back.
You're gonna start limiting questions.
See what you're firing.
One per person. You're gonna start limiting questions.
I would never do that.
We're gonna try to do it monthly.
Yes, we are.
So. I don't know, but I opened mine up. Yes.
I mean, they used to have ring jewelry. That's why I loved it. I think that's where I got my love of jewelry from. The Cracker Jack box. Okay, guys, they've just been sitting here listening to me.
All right. Bye,